Welcome back. I'm Dr. Dwight Turner. This is Being the Other. I look forward to working with you. Well, welcome back. This is Being the Other. I'm Dr. Dwight Turner. And this episode is going to look at fear of the other. First of all, though, I'm actually going to offer you an apology. It's taken me 3 weeks before I've even gotten to talk to you about Brexit, Donald Trump, and the other ways and means of us seeing the other in the current day and age. Now, the reason why I think it's important to acknowledge these incidents is that both the US election from last year and Britain's Brexit vote of last year as well were very much driven by a fear of otherness, a fear of difference, and a fear of diversity. It's therefore important that we start to look at and acknowledge just what it is that we're really afraid of. But before we actually start to look at what it is that we're afraid of when we encounter the other, it's probably important, just as important, to look at how we've used rules and regulations as a way of containing our fear of the other. For example, the number of rules and regulations and ideas about how people are supposed to be they women, be they persons of colour, be they of the LGBT community, we spend a lot of time saying you're supposed to be this, stereotyping, objectifying, othering, fixing the other in a position so we don't have to really engage with difference, with that person sat opposite us in some way, shape or form. Another way that we mask our own fear of otherness is by marginalising the other, by actually placing them in a position where they're far away from us, where we don't have to see and witness or be around them in some way. A third example, and perhaps one that is actually most prevalent in the world today, is by actually literally destroying the other, be it psychologically, and I'll talk more about that in another episode, perhaps in the future, to literally trying to destroy the other. I'll leave you to work out what that really means. But these are just some examples of how we actually hide away from our fear of the other and work incredibly hard to push them out of our way. Now, I'm a therapist. And actually, it's my job as a therapist to look at what the internal challenges are within us when we encounter the other. So I'm going to offer you these. If I'm going to define myself by the other, then an encounter, a truly relational encounter, challenges that personal definition of who I happen to be. Another way of looking at that is, if I have an egoic sense of self that I've built and formed in some way, and I meet you in the street, then the first thing that happens, if you are different to me in whatever way, is that egoic sense of self feels threatened. So one way of dealing with that is by making you other and, as I've said before, either distancing myself from you or marginalizing you or destroying you in whatever way, shape or form. You know, I told you the story in the first episode about being at a workshop where a woman stereotyped me, calling me a bouncer as opposed to being able to acknowledge me as a therapist, like her. Her encounter with difference threatened her own idea of what a therapist was supposed to be. Simple as that. Now, even though I'm talking to you about difference and diversity and so on and otherness, what I can't do is stand here and say that I'm immune to the challenges of encountering the other in whatever way I encounter it. Let me give you an example. About 6 or 7 years ago, I'm sat with my wife in a cafe in London, and we're sat by the window. And outside the window, there's an obviously unwell woman. I think she had some sort of mental health difficulty, I'm not really sure. And she sat there, she's smoking a cigarette, and she's just doing her own thing, she's minding her own business. She then gets up, comes inside the cafe, and sits next to myself and my wife, opposite me, next to my wife. At that point, I start to feel very nervous. I start to feel a little bit anxious. I start to worry that this woman being unwell in some way may hamper or hinder or threaten myself and my wife. She doesn't know. She finishes her drink, she gets up, she goes out the door, she goes along her way. But I even then have to acknowledge my own relief that she's departed. Now, when I sat down and thought about that later on, thought about what it was that I was threatened of, it was perhaps my own sense of when I've been in difficult situations, when I've needed therapy, when I've actually had to engage with the part of myself that's perhaps a little bit on the edge. And seeing it sat there reminded me of that part. It was a bizarre experience on one level, but a very helpful experience on another. So what that example there shows us is that whatever egoic structure I built around my sense of self was challenged by the mere presence of difference. I wasn't harmed by it. She wasn't even aware of me, probably. And yet her mere existence was something that a part of me couldn't handle. Now, if we look at that on a collective scale, it makes sense that we'd be afraid of the other in some way, shape, or form. But here's the crux of things. When I sat down and thought about for myself what I could learn from that experience, I recognized parts of myself that I hadn't seen for ages. I grew up from actually having that experience in the cafe with a woman who was just drinking a coffee, smoking a cigarette. But when we decide that this is who we are and we're not going to change and we have to fit in with how we happen to be, what we're actually doing is saying we're too afraid to grow up and to change. That's why one of the reasons why I believe we're afraid of the other. I'm going to leave it there for this week. As always, keep subscribing. Keep letting me know where you are in the world. It's a pleasure to read your emails and notes. The email address is in the description below. Subscription. My God, what's that about? I look forward to hearing from you. I look forward to seeing you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.